Hello, I'm your host Jim McClean. Welcome back to another episode of the Banterflix Movie Review Show here on NvTv. Joining me in the studio this evening is the lovely Dr. Giuliana Monteverde.
Hi.
And James Oliver.
Hi.
Hello to you both. Let's see what we've lined up tonight. We'll be reviewing The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Our pick of the streams is Garry Walsh's Wickedly Evil. And our Powell and Pressburger retrospective concludes as we look back at their 1947 feature, Black Narcissus. So that's what we've lined up for you this evening. Now, Giuliana, the last time we had you in the studio, we were talking all things Mean Girls, because that show was just before Mean Girls Day. And in the last week, since we last recorded here in the studio, we've had our first look at the trailer for Mean Girls, the musical. The musical, really important thing, and really important element of the film, but it seems to have been hidden by the film's new marketing campaign. There's very little reference to it within the trailer. So I think when we had you on last time, we talked a little bit about that, because they had just announced that the musical, the stage play, is going to be coming to London next year, and tickets had just went on sale. But I can't remember if you were excited about the film's release next year, and more importantly, now that you've had your first look at our new version, this is not your mom's Mean Girls, this is the new Mean Girls for 2024. So just wanted to know, since we have you back on, has this new trailer got you excited for Tina Fey's next outing for the Mean Girls?
I don't know that I would go as far as excited. I would certainly say that I'm curious. So I'm a fan of Mean Girls, I'm a big fan of musicals, and I have listened to some of the soundtrack, and I enjoy some of the songs, so I can guarantee that I will be there. I am just a little apprehensive about the choice to not show that it was a musical in the trailer. Obviously it's been updated to some degree, you know, there's more diverse casting, there are references to more modern types of media, social media for example. And I mean, my friends and family members have commented on the fact that there's not really a need for a Mean Girls reboot, and so I think it was an error for them not to clearly show that it was a musical. And I'm not sure that the word musical is even in the title. It just says Mean Girls. And for that reason, I'm a little confused as to why they chose to do that.
So it's weird, but James, I know we have to get your opinion and hear what you think, but before we do, I think we should, just for our viewers at home who maybe haven't seen the new trailer, let's let them have a look.
We as women have to be able to support each other.
Get in, loser.
Welcome, Katie.
You're never gonna believe what I found this morning. Your burn book.
Mom, go make snacks.
For sure, Regina, yeah.
Do you like gum?
Sure.
Oh, no, I don't have any. I was just...
You're a mess.
We will help you, Caddy.
So that's a look at Mean Girls, the musical, even though the trailer gives very little reference to the fact that it is in fact a musical. James, is the point where you get to share your opinion. And I'm intrigued of what you're going to say, because when I mentioned that would you have a look at this trailer, I'll not repeat exactly what you said to me back through the medium of WhatsApp, but I gauged that you weren't a fan and you're not particularly looking forward to this film. So I don't know, have you had time to reflect on that? You've rewatched it here in the studio this evening. Your thoughts? You've heard Giuliana, you've heard me. What's your thoughts on Mean Girls, the musical?
Just stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen. I don't know why they chose to do this. Updating something, okay, but when it's a cult classic like Mean Girls, no need for it, leave it alone. You could still, let people and let mums and their daughters watch it nowadays, and it'll still be just as fun as it was. Trying to make it into a musical number, it's just, I don't see it working. Yeah, as Giuliana had already said about making it more diverse casting in certain areas and all, that's all well and good. But you just, why take such an iconic film such as Mean Girls and just, add a bit of the musical side to it? It's just, I personally don't think it's needed.
The key thing, I suppose, to pick up on what you've said is the fact they have already done this. I mean, the fact that it has already been adapted to the stage. It's been on Broadway. I think Washington, is where it got its debut. I could be wrong. Apologies if I'm not getting that right. I know you've hinted at it a little bit, but are you disappointed that we haven't had more of an outright clarification that this is a musical? It's not just, as James kind of said, it's not just a remake of the original.
I just continue to be confused about it, basically, because I would have guessed that the reason that they are making the musical into a film is to ride the wave of other examples of that, such as Hamilton. It's a way of democratizing the theatre experience. You know, people that are into musicals and plays are able to see them on cinema screens or on streaming services. And so I would imagine that they would have centered the marketing campaign around that, which is why it's confusing. On the other hand, it's perhaps a marketing decision. I know that the original cast members of Mean Girls, except for Rachel McAdams, but including Lindsay Lohan, did get together. I don't know if you've seen it, to film a trailer for Black Friday, I believe. So whether it's part of some sort of just popularizing or reminding us of the fact that Mean Girls exists and that we like it, and not trying to muddy the waters with the fact that it's a musical, but I can think of no good reason that they would have made that decision.
James, just on that point, I know you're not sold on this new version, this updated version of Mean Girls that we're going to see next year, but just on that point, had it been a filmed version of the stage play, of the musical, would you have been tempted to go see that at the cinema?
I don't know. Musicals, okay, well, I'm going to say musicals aren't usually my thing, but in saying that, if like a film musical in terms of, so not an adapted screenplay, but an actual, you know, like La La Land, I love that type of film. The likes of Hamilton, I've never really sat down to sit for it. Although I did go and see Rocky Horror Picture Show at the Opera House earlier this year, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I mean, give and take. I can enjoy both. So if it maybe had been a televised version of that, yeah, it might have got my money. But yeah, as it stands, I can't say I'll be there.
Look, James, I just don't know. I mean, everybody else during the pandemic seemed to sit and watch Hamilton when it was released on Disney. You've missed out, I think, if anything, you take from this evening, go home and watch Hamilton and finally give in to all that, because I guarantee you'll be back. But enough of that kind of cheap attempts at puns. Let's move on to our first review of the week.
I am honored to introduce to you the creator of the Hunger Games themselves, Dean Casca Highbottom.
Select students, faculty, and of course, Dr. Gall. I have summoned you all here today for the 10th annual reaping ceremony, in which we choose 2 children from each district to throw into the capital arena to fight to the death in the Hunger Games.
So that's a look at the trailer for the Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. We've all seen this. It was released in cinemas last week. Giuliana, I'll come to you first. So this is an origin story of sorts for Coriolanus Snow that we will know as Donald Sutherland from the original trilogy. Well, quadrilogy, we say there was 4 films, 3 books, 4 films. So now we're going back. I wouldn't say it's an origin story for his rise to power, but it's kind of showing us the man that became that figurehead of Panam. And I keep thinking of Kylie Minogue's Padam anytime I think of that place now. But we have this in cinemas now. We have Rachel Ziegler, I know would probably be the most familiar face for many, I'd imagine, from West Side Story here. Were you a fan of the original Hunger Games books, films? Did you come into this as someone who, we've talked about your love for Mean Girls, so I mean, did you come into this as a fan of the source material?
Yes. I've read all the Hunger Games books. Sadly, I did not have time to read this new one before I went to see it. I was disappointed in myself for that. I went to see all the previous movies as kind of appointment viewing. And so, yeah, I definitely have a fondness for them, although I would say, like the Harry Potter movies, the film adaptations of the books don't quite hit the same notes. You know, I feel like if you enjoy a book, they rarely do. I was a little apprehensive about this one. The Rotten Tomatoes score wasn't great when I checked it in advance, which I always do. And the length of it also sort of put me off in advance. However, I have to say I did enjoy it. You know, I enjoy the world of the Hunger Games. I think it's well done, it's well realised. I like the themes as it pertains to war, violence, spectacle, and for me personally, it overlaps with reality TV, the types of exploitation and surveillance that you might find in both our world and the world of the Hunger Games. So I enjoyed it more than I expected. Now it's important to note that this movie is more musical than I ever would have thought. And I imagine for some people that might put them off. So when the first kind of singing started, I was like, well, you know, I thought this is a bit hammy. You know, there were bits of it where I was, oh no. But honestly, I think that Rachel Ziegler is excellent. I am prone to a musical anyway. I like the genre of kind of country folk resistance music, I guess. And so, yeah, I enjoyed it, to be honest. I did think that it had interesting visual references, particularly with relation to certain conflicts, definitely references to Nazism in some of the imagery and some of the setting and the uniforms. And I also thought it had some things to say or some hints around alt-right masculinity, the shaved head, the guns, the rejection as a means to violence, you know? So I found it interesting. I went straight online afterwards and had a good read.
I enjoyed this film with reservations. I have to say, for me, it's a film of two halves. I mean, you could have, and I very rarely find myself saying this, you could have probably easily broke this film up into a part 1 and part 2. That's never a good thing. The sequence in the Hunger Games, the build up to the Hunger Games themselves, this is what, 64 years, I think, before we have Katniss showing up, is good. It's tough at times. I mean, there is some tough sequences. The first Hunger Games, I know, shocked quite a lot of viewers when it was released in around the time of that kind of 12A certificate. That's a discussion for another time. I think once it ventures out into the world of Panam, I think when the film struggles, and I think that was the same problem with the last installment in the series. I think when it opens itself out, whilst it's interesting and to enjoy that world, I do think it loses itself, because the first hour and a half is quite punchy. It's kind of constantly moving forward. Rachel Ziegler, I think, is great. I think she's this kind of June Carter-esque kind of character, just the way she holds the stage. We know she can sing. The musical numbers you've already alluded to, I think, are great. I think that's what it reminded me, anyway, of kind of the June Carter, particularly the sequence where she's singing on live television. That's what that reminds me of. I just find, you alluded to this, Giuliana, with the runtime. It is a long film. It sags for me in its second half, and that's where I kind of felt myself looking at my clock. But James, this is the point where you get to weigh in. So you weren't that fussed on Mean Girls, a musical. Giuliana did give you a little sly look when she mentioned there's music in this new Hunger Games movie. So I'm intrigued to see what's your thoughts towards this installment in the series.
Well, I certainly didn't pay an admin fee for a musical, that's for sure. So I did not like this at all. You've both alluded to the runtime. That is something that it suffers from, in my opinion. I don't mind a long movie. Killers of the Flower Moon, watched it in IMAX. Superb film, 3.5 hours long. The Irishman did the same thing. Runtimes to me do not matter as long as it tells a coherent story. This to me does in an hour and a half. Good, you have the setup, you have the Hunger Games taking place, and then the whole second half is just not needed, personally. You know, it's just could have been easily shaved off. And it just feels rushed as well. Rachel Ziegler, I personally, again, I'm not a fan of her. I didn't like her in West Side Story. I hated that film, and that's okay. I've said things on here before that have a mob of people at my door, so not afraid to say that. But yeah, I didn't get the hype around her. And then the only other thing I've seen her in, Shazam, which again she played a small role in, so not too much. And then she comes into this from the trailer, looked great. I thought we were gonna, maybe see a different style to her. And no, she's just sitting there with a guitar, singing the same two songs for the duration of the whole film, and that did annoy me. So yeah, wasn't a fan of it at all.
Even worse, James, when you had Giuliana and I kind of sitting in the cinema seats in front of you singing along. We will agree to disagree in Rachel Ziegler. I do think she's fab, and I think she's fab in this. I do think she kind of steals the show a little bit, and I do think that's a problem. And just before we move on to our pick of the streams, I just want to give a very quick shout out to Viola Davis, because she's fab in this. There's another performance I think is fab in this film. So yeah, mixed views on our first film of the night. Let's move on to our second film.
Keith is going to get the boat sorted and we'll be home and free. Getting your knickers in a twist over nothing. Okay, relax. Don't tell me to relax. We have a hostage, a gunshot victim. I got a phone call earlier. I think, I'm not sure, it might have been Momo saying what? It's something like, get out. I'm gonna get you out of here. It's gonna be alright. Hey, tell me this now. Look, we have the money, we have the drugs, most of us are in one piece.
So that's a look at Wickedly Evil. We interviewed Garry Walsh, the film's director, on last week's show. We just didn't have time to sit down and discuss the film. So this is his feature debut, Irish filmmaker. It's now available, as we say, various VOD platforms. I will state right from the get-go that Banterflix here, we run the Dark Hedges International Film Festival. We screened this film. So I had seen it before we sat down to review it in the show. So I do like this film. I have reservations about it, I will say, right from the get-go. But I am a fan of it. It's a low-budget Irish feature. Heist goes wrong, and then as it goes along, it does start to dip its toe in horror elements. I don't want to spoil too much about the film. James, you haven't had a good run so far. You haven't been fussed on Mean Girls. You clearly weren't fussed on the new Hunger Games movie. Is this going to be a brighter note for you?
Yes, this was a lot of fun. I only watched it this afternoon, actually. Yeah, and I'd sat, because I remember you'd said about it, and you said it was an Irish horror film, and I'd sort of sat there thinking, okay, I was like, something's coming, I just don't know when, because it starts off very, heist goes wrong, you know, they flee the scene, and you're kind of left with just this sort of sticky situation. They don't know how to get out of it, they don't know, you know, like what they're going to do about it. And then I was sort of sitting there going, this is definitely going somewhere, but I don't know where. I found the humour was quite fun, tongue in cheek at times, but you know, some of the Irish slang that we would have per se is used, and it's quite fun how they don't pick up on it, or they don't know what the other's talking about. And then as it goes along, and like I say, I won't spoil anything, as you said, but yeah, and then when it happens, you're sort of like, oh, okay, it's like, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, and yeah, I'd recommend this one. So.
Okay, well, I'm glad. I am glad that we at least have a film that you've liked this week. As I say, we did screen this film, so it was sent to us many months ago. It was still a work in progress. It was actually under a different title. And at the time I seen it, and what intrigued me was the potential and that sense of someone who's clearly working on a very low budget, but doesn't try to go buck daft and doesn't try to have all this, that, and other, and try to do this and try to do that. They know specifically what they can do and what, importantly, they can't do. Those are the things I like about it, in the sense that it's an, and I suppose to say it's an Irish horror is probably to missell it. It's an Irish thriller that definitely, as I've said, it kind of has comedy elements and does dip its toes in the horror genre in its finale. My only reservation, my main problem, I guess, with the film is that it does take its time to get into those horror elements, and it does feel a bit off kilter with everything else than what we've seen. The film does allude to it throughout its narrative. I would have just liked a little more confidence, but maybe that just comes down to the point, as I mentioned, it's a low budget Irish feature. They've had to work with what they've done. I think a lot of it was shot, if I remember right from the interview with Garry in last week's show, a lot of it was shot with phones, with smartphones and whatever cameras that they had available to themselves. So low budget, I would recommend seeking it out. It's not the best film you're going to see this year, but I think for a feature debut, it's pretty solid. So Giuliana, where are you going to weigh in on this one?
I found this film really fun. I thought the performances were great. I thought despite the low budget, which we've mentioned, the costuming was great. The setting is great. The only thing that I think that I would actually change would be to remove the opening scene. which takes place in a different location. I think it would have increased the sense of claustrophobia if it just stayed in the one location. You know, the way that house is decorated is kind of perfectly eerie but recognizable. Yeah, I was impressed by it, and despite the fact that there's a low budget, as you say, it has so much potential. You know, with more budget, that would be a really exciting, fun film. I thought that everyone there perfectly embodied their characters. I laughed along with it. I was very surprised by parts of it. Yeah, it's a yes for me.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, because it's not just for Garry. You know, if he's watching, Garry. I mean, we've all liked this film this week. As I said, we got the chance to speak to him last week via Zoom. But it's also the fact that we screened the film. It's the sense that I saw potential, and I guess from following on from what we mentioned last week when I was talking to Garry, was that sense of I'm really interested to see where he goes next with a bigger budget. You know, we jokingly mentioned, you know, he might want to do a Sam Raimi and go back and remake this film with a bigger budget, or might want to go off and do something completely different. We'll have to wait and see. So as I say, it's available now on various VOD platforms. So we've all been largely positive about that. So you can seek it out, viewers, if you so wish. And with that, we shall move on and wrap up this week's show with our last review of the evening. So that's a look at Black Narcissus. This is the last film in our Powell and Pressburger retrospective. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's 1947 feature. This is not just a Banterflix thing. The BFI have been doing this season throughout the last few months and into the new year. So getting a chance to see these films on the big screen. You know, we mentioned the Dark Hedges Film Festival earlier when we were talking about Wickedly Evil. We screened this in partnership with the Strand last month. James, I'm going to come to you first. So this is a group of nuns going to the Himalayas, and I don't really know how much we want to say at this stage, but they find themselves experiencing very different kind of, having a reaction and react to the people around them, to the group themselves. Things happen, I guess, is a nice and short way of saying about Black Narcissus. So what did you, I guess the important question is, had you watched this film before we asked you to review it this week, and what did you think?
No, I hadn't watched it before now. I hadn't even heard of it before now. Yeah, any film that's like pre-2000s or early 90s, I struggle with a bit. So, I find it had quite interesting themes for being made so early on, you know, from like the 1940s essentially. It tackled quite interesting themes, and that was interesting to see. It also has ever so slightly, I don't know, sort of like dark undercurrents, you know, there's some stuff that goes on that you're like, oh, okay. So, yeah, all in all, enjoyable. I wouldn't be quick to go back for a rewatch, but for checking out, you know, like a classic, as people give me a list of all the time, yeah, it's definitely thumbs up.
There is interesting things that the film explores within its representation. I mean, these are nuns that have to decide, I think it's by the end of the year, whether they have to renew their vows, they have to take their vows for celibacy. And there's some wonderful shots in this about how we see the people they were before they decided to become nuns. There's a wonderful sequence where one of the women, it shows her out with her partner, and she kind of turns to the camera, and as she turns, we then see her back to the present in her habit. There is interesting things. It's one of the shortest films I think we've discussed in the Powell and Pressburger. It's under 2 hours. I know The Red Shoes was over 2 hours, and I know when we were in the studio we said we did feel that it stretched our patience. I really enjoyed this film, and I know we screened it at the festival, so I'm biased. And it's been the chance to finally getting the chance to see it on the big screen and sit back and enjoy the visuals. But we come to you, Giuliana. I don't know, had you seen this film before we asked you to review it? So like James, you hadn't seen this. What did you think?
It was a strange film, which makes sense because it's 80 years old, more or less. It's taking place, it's being made in an environment, a cultural environment that is very different from the one we're in. So it's hard to talk about this and not talk about race and gender, okay? It is set in the Himalayas. We start off in Calcutta. There are multiple examples of white actors playing characters of color, and so that's jarring to watch. It's also perplexing. You know, I know that there are obviously political and cultural, historical reasons at the time, but it's just perplexing because Indian actors exist. You know, there's quite a few of them around. It just seems bizarre, and it's distracting, and particularly the housekeeper character, who could not look more English if she tried, but who's kind of dressed up as a Himalayan traditional housekeeper, whatever that is. I'm glad that I watched it. The score was great. Performances were compelling. I was surprised about where it went, you know, and I throughout at every point I thought, what is happening here? And where is this going? Because obviously if you're not familiar with maybe the time period or the particular genre as it operates in that time period, you don't necessarily know the narrative beats that it's going to hit. And for that reason, it can be quite fun to watch because I could guess by current sensibilities where things were going to go. But in 1947, I don't know what's going on. So yeah, I find it interesting. It's probably the best word for it. And the stuff around race is it's a bit uncomfortable. And I think it's noteworthy. It came out, I believe, shortly before the British left India. And so particularly how the film ends, you could view that as a metaphor for the British presence in India in terms of this was never ours, we didn't belong here, it's time for us to go now. Mm-hmm. And there's a bit of a melancholy feel, which seems appropriate. So certainly interesting from various different perspectives, both technically, cinematically, and also socio-politically.
Totally agree. I think I mentioned this was just released shortly after the end of the Second World War. So Powell and Pressburger, in their way, were probably looking at that idea of the British Empire and kind of the beginning of the end, I guess, for that. It is an interesting film. I mean, all of the Powell and Pressburger films, they are, in their way, many times they are of their time, but they're also, there's a timeless quality to most of Powell and Pressburger's back catalogue. I'd recommend seeking them out. But look, that is us pretty much out of time this evening. So all that is really left for me to do is to thank my guests. But before I do that, let's have a look at what movies we'll be discussing next week.
Your Majesty, we are discovered.
Good.
Guys! It's a trap!
I'm the first to admit when I make a mistake.
There's something in the barn.
What do you mean, something?
So what do you think happened?
Probably some kids.
Woo!
That's a barn elf.
Are they real?
Yes.
Number one, you gotta keep him out of bright light. Number two, keep him away from water.
It's incredible.
And probably the most important thing, don't ever feed him after midnight.
So that's a look at the movies we'll be discussing next week, and because it is December, it will be our first Christmas movie. And more importantly, here in the studio, we will be having the official turning on of the Banterflix Christmas lights here at the NvTv studio. Last year, we spared no expense. We had Paul Chuckle turn them on. So who will it be? You'll have to tune in and see next week. But that's next week's show. As I said, all that's left for me to do now this evening is thank my two guests. So thank you very much, Giuliana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.